All right, so this lecture is going to be all about rendering your final projects for Nuke. So it's really just kind of thinking ahead about what you guys may want to do in Nuke, what things you're trying to control. And I know most of you probably haven't used Nuke that much at all. I mean, have any of you even opened the application aside from like verifying it works? Like have you guys really gone in there, made nodes, or connected anything? Probably not. Okay. Yeah, that's kind of usually what we kind of see when students get to me. Most of them haven't really touched Nuke at all. A few maybe have dabbled in it if they've got like the email from Full Sail about getting the license, earlier. But everything we're doing today and on Friday is going to be pretty basic with Nuke. But really, it just comes down to rendering our scenes, thinking about the best way to render it, not just saving out one image. Because you know how before you guys are just saving like that one to render out of the image tool and like turning it in, or like posting it to your ArtStation or whatever. I mean, that's fine, but what if you want to do things to the image? Because if it's one image by itself, what is really what could you do to that in Photoshop? Like, don't even worry about Nuke, because I know you guys don't know Nuke yet, but if you had that image in Photoshop, like your last render for the glass, like what could you maybe do to it in Photoshop at all? Like, yeah, camera filter effects, right? Like throwing some lens flares on it or something. Maybe you could do some like slight color correction things. Again, it comes back to like filtering, almost like doing like an Instagram kind of thing to it, where there's weird tones going on. But basically, what it comes down to is when you're in Photoshop with one image, you are affecting the whole image at once, right? Like Photoshop doesn't understand there's like different materials going on and that they're different objects. Photoshop just sees a bunch of color and then you just kind of move curves and things around. It kind of changes the appearance of the image. We want to do way more than that. So let's kind of break this down into what we probably want to get out of Maya. Because again, every time you're thinking about going into Nuke, or some of you guys may want to do After Effects if you like Adobe products, it's the same thing. If you want to get into After Effects, what are the things you would probably want to control? If you had like unlimited power, like in After Effects, what do we want to do? So we're starting with something called a beauty render. And a beauty render, just in case you guys don't know what this is, you'll probably hear this again when you get to the compositing classes. Anytime you hear someone say, show me your beauty render, or like, where's your beauty? What they're talking about is just your final image. Like, you guys have been doing beauty renders the whole month. I just haven't been calling it a beauty render. But a beauty render is like the final full colored image, lights, materials, textures, like, it's kind of just a one render thing. But we can take that beauty, and this could be broken down into a lot of other separate pieces. So what would be useful to control in Photoshop or After Effects? Like, what things would you like to do if you could have the ability to change something? Lighting, right? That'd be kind of sweet. Like making a light like a different color, turning a light off completely. Right? Highlights, yeah. So we know that we're talking about, all right, lights would be super powerful. And of course, the absence of light, like shadows, which is kind of goes with that. Lights and shadows would be very powerful, somehow controlling that. Said specularity, like material properties. So controlling materials would be useful. What else would be good? Of what? Like if you think about your render, of what specifically? So just like an overall like color effect where you're making like if it's a sunset or a dawn thing, you want like that key light coming through the window, have like a richer color, right? Like a warmer tone. Yep. So a lot of that comes down to this, like modifying the lights to some extent, like changing the way the key light works. We want to have it a completely different color, different saturation. So just think about everything you've made so far in your project. We've got the lights and shadows. We know how to make that. We've built all sorts of materials, and even the textures would kind of fall in that because they're part of the material. The other big thing is, think of it like this. Let's say you were modifying the material, and you were able to produce a render where it showed you nothing but specularity. Like just it's one render by itself where the whole thing's black, but you see a bunch of like speck highlights on everything. If you change that render, does After Effects or like Photoshop know that you're only trying to change spec on like the glass? Like, what is that extra thing that we need if we want to say change it, but on that object or this object? Yeah, there needs to be some type of like an alpha, right? Or like I want to like select an object and then make sure the program understands only affect that one piece. So we also need something for the geometry, like just the ability to control those guys independently. So if I am going to change lights or materials, it doesn't do the whole scene. Maybe it's just one object is like a problem. And that means like if you go back to your hue and saturation thing, maybe like the whole time you've been working in Maya, you've just felt like your pulley texture was just too bright or too rich and just something off about it. Instead of re-rendering it, you could go into Nuke, and if you isolate that object with some type of alpha, you could just drop a saturation on it, fade the material out a little bit, and it might match a little better. So these are basically the things we're going to be trying to create today. The part that's kind of difficult, well, it's not really too difficult, but the trickier part here is just understanding how do you actually do that? Like how do you break up the lights? Now this way right here, we've been able to break up lights in Maya, in Mental Ray, RenderMan for a long time, but imagine like you guys, oh there goes the screen. Imagine you guys were, you've never had this class, but you were doing a nice final render and you wanted to break the lights up. What would you guys do to break the lights up separately? If you just had to like go with your instincts and like figure it out. Maybe light linking. I'll kind of show you an example here. I'm going to go into Nuke. Okay, I'm bringing in my glass reference example. So here's mine, right? This is like the full image. Now, if I wanted to control light separately, what I'm kind of talking about is trying to get a render of each light actually being separate, like just a render of the key light by itself, just a render of the fill light or the dome light. So what you guys could do is manually like hiding and turning off your lights. Like hide the fill light, hide the dome light, do a render of only the key light, and you're going to get a render of just the key light. So we would end up with something that kind of looks like this. Yeah, isn't that great? Yep. There we go. Now it looks similar to the render I had before. Let me actually do something real quick. Okay, let's go back. There we go. Okay, so here is what I'm calling the beauty, kind of what you guys did for the turn-in on Monday. Can you see kind of what's changing when I go between these two? Like what are we seeing that's different? Right, yeah, like we're losing the fill. Right, and it's kind of hard to see the other one, but it's not just a fill light turning off. The dome light, that giant like IBL, thing going around the scene, that's also turning off. So we're kind of getting darker fill light over here. And it's kind of like that for all these guys. Let me kind of fix this for the other ones real quick. So this is the key. There's the dome light by itself. And there's the fill. So they're just rendered separately. Now again, like if you guys were kind of doing this on your own and you had to kind of figure it out, most of you guys would probably just like start hiding lights, right? And then go back into Maya and like turn on the light and then do another render again with a different light visible. And you could do that, and it's not really that complicated when you're thinking about a simple scene like we've been doing, because we only have like 3 lights, so like that's not really a big deal. But imagine you doing something much more complicated like an office room, and you're talking about 20 different lights on the ceiling, and then multiple windows having skylight come in, and there's probably desk lights, hanging out in different spots, and monitors are lighting up different parts of the room. That becomes more complicated because now we're worrying about like managing some 50-something lights and turning them all on and off, and like trying to render it again. So what we have inside of Maya to kind of get around this kind of problem of constantly hiding and showing lights is Maya has this area called the render setup window. And this is new in 2017. It's this guy right here, which is, I know you guys have been hitting that button for the hypershade probably quite a bit. It's right next to it. And I'm sure a couple of you have hit it by mistake. Like you probably have like, I meant to go to the render settings. You hit this thing. Like this is not the render settings. This render setup window gives us the ability to start breaking up the lights and like set up almost like presets where I basically just get the layers working, have one light on turn or one light visible per layer, and it's always going to be that way. And I can tell it to render certain layers. I can go back to the master layer and render all the lights together. But once it's set up, you don't have to like really turn things on and off ever again. It just works forever at that point. So this is going to be the first part, breaking up the lights with the render setup window. So this means for this guy, anyway, we want to do the key light, fill light, and dome light. Okay, our 3 light sources. They're going to be broken up. Now to do that, inside of the render setup window, you can see before we really make anything, we're starting off with this thing called the scene. And the scene is always here. We didn't make this. This has been in your project the entire time, but the scene layer is kind of everything you've built in Maya up to this point. So there's not really a whole lot you have to do in here. It's really just letting you know that this exists. And you can see that we're currently visible on that layer. And this little button over here just means if you did kick off a batch render, it would try to render the full project, which is, again, something you may want to do later. What we want to do, though, is down here in this kind of empty area, instead of us getting a render of all the lights, which is the beauty render, I want to get my different renders of each light separately, which we can set up all through here. And you can see right now it's saying there's no layers at all. So we want to make our first layer. Now to do that, what you're going to do is you hit this little button on the left. It says create a render layer. I'm going to hit it, and you can see a new layer has appeared. It's called Render Setup Layer 1. We're going to rename that in a second. But let me kind of show you what this looks like before we really do anything to it. So in the lecture project, you can see how like when I click kind of back and forth, nothing's really changing. What you want to do, if you ever want to see what a layer really looks like, just don't select it, because that's not changing anything. There's that little eye button that makes it visible. Now, you know how with Photoshop, obviously you can make multiple layers visible at any given time, right? I mean, there could be 20 layers visible. This is a little different. You can only be on one layer at a time. Think of it like a different version of your scene file. So if I hit the visible button on this new layer, watch what happens to my viewport. So what do we keep and what do we lose? This is kind of like the really important part about starting this is you have to just understand what we're beginning with. Right. Now, because this is RenderMan, it actually is not supposed to do this. This is actually more of a bug with Maya, which just happens to be like a workout for us. Normally, when you do the render setup window, like with the Arnold renderer or even with Metal Ray, when you go to a new layer, it should be completely empty. No lights would be visible. Not geometry. It would just look like an empty Maya scene with nothing in it. But because we're using RenderMan and Maya is having a slight issue where it's not understanding to hide those guys, it basically just means the lights are visible. It's not really that big of an issue, but that when we start like controlling the lights, instead of us adding the light we want to each layer, in our case, what we're going to end up doing is the opposite. We're going to start removing lights from the layer to prevent all 3 from being on at one time. So our biggest problem right now, though, is really just we want to see the geometry. Because if I were to render this right now from the camera, let's see what we would get. Like, here's me looking through the camera. I'm getting a render of trees. Right? Beautiful. Yeah, that's not what we want. And in your case, for the lab, you're going to get a render of like that weird industrial-looking warehouse that you guys have on your dome light. So this is not quite what we were shooting for. So what we want to do is figure out how do I add geometry to this layer. So to add geometry, we need to make something called a collection. And think of a collection just like a group of assets that you just have together, and you can just tell that group to be visible on this layer. Now, they're probably going to work out some of the little kinks with this because it's still relatively new, and I think they're kind of haven't really optimized it because there's a lot of tools we're going to use that aren't even visible. So if I ever want to make a collection, what you want to do, because I don't even think it's listed up here at all. Yeah, it's like I don't see anything for collection. What is this doing? Create layer, make a template. These are all useless. But if you right-click on the layer, there's something here called collection. So if I right-click on that, we're going to do create collection. And you'll notice this puts almost like another layer kind of inside of it. But again, it's kind of like Photoshop with groups, where if I kind of collapse that group, you can see that collection is part of it. So this layer has some type of collection within it. And again, has anything changed? No, it's just like an empty group is hanging out. So in the collection, again, once you guys right-click, hit Create Collection, when you see this pop up right here, this is where we need to add our geometry. So what I'm going to do is I could go back to the scene, hit the little visible button, and then start manually clicking through these guys to select everything. But probably what you guys have is some group in the outliner where you can just click on it, or like select all your objects and add it that way. So I'm going to do it that way, where instead of me clicking on things in the viewer, I'm just going to go to my geometry group, which is in the outliner, and just start selecting all the pieces I think I want. So you're going to click on all your geometry. And then over here, back in the render setup window, once you have everything selected that you want, you're going to hit the add button on the right. See how it kind of makes a list where it's added all those guys to that collection. Now, what did that do? Okay, because I'm still on the main scene layer, which is kind of why we're seeing everything. Now, watch what happens now when I go to the new layer. Let me back up. Before, remember, we only saw lights. Now there's geometry. Yes?
Could you just select the geometry group in the outliner, or do you have to individually select it?
Try it out. But I think groups do work. It should understand what to do. You'll know if you add the group and you go to the layer, if it's not visible, just remove it from that thing and then just click on the geometry one by one. Yeah. So you have the collection here already? Okay, so do you have the layer? Oh, for note, yeah. So if you have a layer down, which is that button right there, you then right-click in the layer, make a collection, which is what made this little group kind of below it. And this thing was empty. So what I did is basically when you're on the collection, I just went into the outliner and just selected all my geometry. And then once you have all the objects selected that you want to include, back here on the collection, you just hit add right to the right. And as soon as you add it, if you're looking on the layer, you should notice that immediately all the objects appear. So we have geometry on the layer. And instead of it being just called collection 1, which isn't very useful, let's rename this to geometry collection or geo collection, just so I'm aware those are my objects, not something else. Now, this is kind of the first part. We got the objects there. Now remember, the other thing we were talking about was we also want to break up the lights, right, and start turning things off. We haven't done that yet. So if I were to render it, what do you think this scene would look like? Like if you compare this to the original. Well, like identical to the original, right? All the lights are there, all the geometry, so nothing's different. So I want to remove these guys from the layer. So to do that, what you're going to do is we're going to make a different collection for each light, and I'll kind of show you why. Because one kind of nice little benefit of the collection is there's this little button to the right called Disable. Watch what happens if I disable a collection. See how it's acting like it's hiding something? Like because that group of geometry, if you disable it, you don't see it again. That's basically what we're going to do for the lights. Like make a collection for each one. That way I can just hit disable and shut off a light instead of you guys going in there, hiding it and showing it later on. So now if I want to make a new collection, be careful how you guys do this, because this is probably one of the biggest issues that pops up. this whole setup is really picky about what you have selected anytime you make a collection. So for example, like remember this is the layer. If I have this selected and I am right clicking on this guy and making a collection, watch what happens. See how it's like it's within this? I mean, if I add something to this collection, if I ever mess around with the geometry, it's going to have an impact on that guy because this is part of the collection above it. It's all, I don't really know what to compare this to aside from if you guys have ever done like groups within groups in Maya, like that's kind of what's going on right now. So let me remove this one. I'm going to right click on it, delete. Anytime you want to add a collection to the layer, right click on the layer and do it. So I'm going to right click on this guy, create collection, and I'm going to just start naming them immediately. We'll call this key light collection. Right click on that layer again, create collection. I'll do it again for the other light. And so basically what I'm doing is just making 3 new empty collections, and I'm just going to immediately rename them to key light collection, warm light collection, and dome light collection. So the first one has our geometry. You can see when I click on it, this giant list pops up. These guys, when I click on them, are still empty. Even though I've named them, I haven't done anything yet. So what do you think would be the obvious thing we would do to these collections? Yeah. Probably put the key light within that group, right? Because I'm naming it. So let's try that out. Okay, so I'm going to click on this. And on that collection, hit add. Go to my warm light. Not warm light, what am I doing? Fill light. Click on that. Add. Dome light. Select it. Add. So I'm just adding the respective lights to kind of their named layers. Nothing's happened yet, but now once I've added them, if I kind of know which light I'm doing right here, like probably I would start with the key light. That's kind of the main one. If I were to hit disable on the fill and dome light collection, you can see how those turn off. Like you don't see any fill or dome in the background. So if we rendered it, we would basically just be getting the key light by itself. So let's turn those back on. Now I'm going to name this layer immediately. Because it shouldn't be called render setup layer 1. This is the layer we're doing for the key light. So we're going to name it that way. Key light layer. Okay. Now, from here, I can start turning things off and on as I need to. So in the key light layer, I am going to turn off the fill and dome. So I'm going to hit disable on both of those guys. We're down to only the key light. Does it make sense so far as setting up the collections? One of the things I kind of recommend we do, like as you start building this, I don't want you waiting on batch renders for like 30 minutes to find out something was broken the whole time. So what we're going to want to do is do a couple simple, super low quality test renders just to make sure, like in the image tool, it looks like it's just one light before we even do a batch render. So what I'm going to do to test this out is I'm first going to go back to the scene layer, which again, remember is everything. And I want to render the scene first, just so I have like a reference of where we started. And when I render on the new layer, I'm going to kind of go back and forth, and we're going to visually make sure that it looks like lights are turning off. So if I want to render the scene layer, make sure that you hit the visible button on scene, like not on the new layer. Go back to the scene, and let's try doing a render. And I'll just do some crappy little IPR. We're not going to wait for the whole thing to finish, but I'll let it go for just like 30 seconds. We'll let it generate a little information, and then we'll probably cancel it and move on to the next layer.
If we have the place 3D textures, do we add those to geometry?
You do not have. So good question. In your scene, you guys have those like 3D placement nodes for like the projections kind of hanging out, or like your solid fractal, like the bump on the bottle. You do not have to add those. As long as the geometry is there, like even if the projection doesn't look like it's visible, it's still going to show up.
Okay.
Yep. So don't worry about that. You don't have to add your camera. Those will still work. It's really just getting the geometry and the lights in there. All right, that's good enough. Like I can kind of work with this. All right, so I'm gonna hit escape. So this is where we left off with everything, like all the lights. Now I hit escape to stop it. What I'm gonna do now to kind of test this guy out is I'm gonna hit the little visible button. We're gonna go down to the key light layer where, remember, I've disabled these collections and it looks like those two lights are turning off. Now while I'm on this layer, I'm gonna hit the IPR button again. We're going to do another IPR. And I just want to see if this looks like it's doing what we told it to do. You guys already see like any differences? Yep. And if you're unsure, again, this is kind of why I did that other render. Like, I don't know if it's working. Like, look at your other render. Like, yep. It is turning to darkness. Charlie Murphy would be proud. Okay. So we're losing a couple things. Now the background's getting really dark. What's probably causing that? Yeah, that's the dome light. That's our giant, our metal ray. That's the IBL. We're losing the dome light. And the other key kind of point here is if you look at that side of the bottle, what's that highlight from? Yeah, that's that other area light, our fill light. So there's the fill. Now that one's kind of subtle, so I think if you guys are trying to see if the fill's working, you're probably getting one of those highlights on your bottle or maybe on some of the metal pieces. As long as you're kind of rendering that area, you should be able to tell if it looks like that light's turning on or off. And you guys have that cool kind of arcing IES pattern on the wall. Like you should see that turn off if you did it right. All right, so there we go. That all seemed to work. I'll hit escape. Now from here, once you get one layer built, it's really easy to do the other ones because we're not going to keep rebuilding it from scratch. We're just going to duplicate this and then turn off a few other the collections. Now, I want to see like if you guys all can do this because I noticed we had one guy last month where he couldn't do this at all. If you click on the key light layer, does anyone not see these menus at the top at all? Like if you go to edit, it's not even showing cut, copy, paste. Like usually everyone can see it. We had one guy last month where nothing was showing up. What's happening with yours? Like do you not have any of it? Okay, you do. So everyone sees that at the top? I have no idea. I don't know, dude. Like this is usually how you can copy and paste things. You don't have it. Have fun building it from scratch again. Like, I don't know what to tell you. So it's not really a huge deal. If you guys get to lab, and let's just assume someone doesn't have the copy paste. I mean, you all know what the hotkeys are anyway. I mean, I don't know if they work. Oh, they do. Okay. We know the hotkeys, so that's nice. But I think with his, there was even something wrong with his hotkeys. Like nothing was allowing him to copy and paste stuff. And so really what you would do is instead of you pasting it from a this and making a duplicate, you just make a new layer, add the collections to it one by one. Very similar to how we did this. It's not really too difficult. But I'm going to do the copy and paste thing. So what I'm going to do is kind of collapse this down so I don't see all that. I'm just going to click on the main layer and we're going to do our basic copy paste. So Command C, Command V. Let me minimize that for a quick second. And then I'm going to Command V one more time. So I've just pasted that layer twice. And you can kind of tell if it's a duplicate because the other layers will be sort of like italics. I don't think that really matters. I don't know why they go italic, but it's still going to work. So let's start with the second layer here. What would I probably want to name this? Yep, you already got it. Yeah, key light layer. This is going to be fill light layer. I'll name this one real fast since we kind of know what we're going to do with this. Yep, dome light layer. Now, if I kind of want to go to the visibility of these just to see what they all look like. So here's the visibility of the one we already did. Key light. Key light's visible. The key light's still visible. And the key light's visible on that one. So because we made a duplicate, every single layer looks the same. So what would we probably do on the fill light layer? Yeah, I want to turn off the key, right? Okay, so let me go to the fills. I can see it. Go to the fill layer with the eye. You can see I'm turning the key off and turning the fill on. Go to the dome light layer. We'll turn on the visibility. Turn the key off. Turn the dome back on. That's it. And the nice thing about this, again, is once you set this up, even if you start changing things in the scene, like you change the materials, maybe you're moving the key light around to a new position, it still all updates because now you can go to any one of these layers. I'll kind of minimize them again. Any one of these layers, and as long as you're on the right layer, you're going to get a render of that one light by itself. And you can add new lights to it at any point. Just add a new collection, add another light. It's pretty easy. Do you guys have any questions about that so far? Feeling good? No questions? Okay. Let me try rendering them, because I think you guys all kind of understand how this works. It seems pretty straightforward. I'm going to go to the fill light, and I'm going to kick off an IPR, and we're just going to, again, make sure this looks like the fill light. This is exactly what you guys are going to be doing when you first get to lab. Just verifying each layer looks correct. I'm going to say, yep, that looks like just the fill light. It's clearly not the key light. We're getting the highlight. It's coming from a different angle. Like, I'm pretty good. Okay. Mine actually looks way darker than this on my screen. Yep, mine's kind of like that even. Okay. Yeah, even though, like on my render in Nuke, if you look at what my fill light looks like, it's not that far off from yours. See that? This is actually not what it looks like on my laptop. It's this TV is like brightening things up. My laptop looks a little more like this. Okay, yeah. Yeah, you're doing fine. Okay, so fill light looked good. I'm going to hop down to the dome light, and we're just going to do this one more time. Just make sure it looks like the dome light. But, I mean, you don't really need to let this finish. Within a few minutes, again, you'll kind of know if it's working. Like, yep, I'm already pretty confident we did it right. Like, that looks like a completely different light. It feels like skylight, which is kind of what the dome light does. We did it. Okay, so let's hit escape. So now I've got my 4 renders: dome, fill, key, and then my beauty, which was really just used for a reference, so I can kind of make sure I understand what's going on here. So these are the 3 parts that make up that guy. All right. So that's the first part, getting the layers set up. Oh, this thing? Yes, leave it up there as I minimize it. And minimize. Yeah, so I'll leave this up. Now, when you do it this way through the render setup window, this means when you're rendering it, you are doing 3 different renders, right? Now, they're not going to take as long because since it's only one light, like each one individually is going to be fairly quick because it doesn't take long to calculate one light. But still, you are doing 3 different renders, so you're getting 3 different images eventually when we do the batch. And the next part we want to get into is getting into the materials and then figuring out, all right, so within the key light render, how do I get different information for the materials? Good? Okay. What are the different material properties you think you'd want to control? Love it. All right. Yep, we're going to do that. So we're on a good start here. We have, I heard diffuse, throwing out all the keywords. We know about specular. Yeah, glass. Glass is called, it's not called like a glass render. It's actually called transmission. And you probably heard refraction, which is, again, very similar to this. Transparency, refraction, transmission are all kind of talking about the same thing. So specularity was very similar to a reflection. Diffuse is our texture color, right? And how that reacts with the light. Is there anything else you can think of that we did? Well, bump will kind of be included with those because if you had like a spec render, it's going to show you how the bump kind of modifies that anyway. So bump will just kind of be included with this stuff. Now there are other material passes that we didn't do, even though they do exist in the material. As I showed you guys, that material has a subsurface scatter, like skin, like candle wax, like light going into a surface and kind of bleeding around. We didn't do it, but like there's a scatter thing in there that we could turn on if we were doing something like that. There is going to be is an occlusion part of the material. There is also not irradiance, iridescence. Yeah, I'm not gonna try spelling that. Yeah, there's iridescence. A lot of different parts that kind of make up the material, but these are really the main ones we're concerned about. We didn't really do these guys quite yet, so we're gonna focus on these first. Materials: diffuse, spec, glass. Now, this part is going to be different because I don't want to start turning off material properties because that's going to get really complicated. And we used to have to do this in the dark ages of rendering. Like a long time ago, which thankfully you guys are never going to have to deal with unless you end up at some archaic studio that's like not with the times. Well, we used to have to do a long time ago. I mean, just kind of think about this again. Imagine you're working in Maya 6 before they even gave it years. Like light gray colors, the first version of Mental Ray's out, you know, and you're like, Final Gather is not even released yet. Like it's super basic. If you turn on ray trace shadows, you think you're doing something amazing. So if in that version of Maya, you didn't have the ability to do any of that stuff. You didn't have the ability to do any of the render layers. And there's nothing called passes at that point. So what we used to have to do is if you're looking at an image like this, we would be manually turning lights on and off, which isn't a huge deal, but let's pretend you guys are looking at just a key light render and you hid the other lights just by hiding them in the outliner. How could you make this render look like only your diffuse properties? Like what do you think we were doing back in like 2000 or so to make it look like just a diffuse render? Yep. Meaning you're going to every material and like, I want a diffuse render. And now I'm going to spec and turning off all my spec properties, all my maps, turning off all my transparency in the glass. Like you're actually modifying the material. So the only thing on the material is the diffuse. And then eventually you render it and you get an image. And it was like that for specular, but now it's the opposite. We're now leaving all the spec properties on and then turning the diffuse off. And if you've got like 100 materials, that is a terrible time. Like you're going node by node to do that. It was awful. I'm glad you guys are never going to have to experience that. Now, what we have instead is something called render passes, which just automates all that for us. Basically what we're going to do is as long as we set up the passes properly and you pick the right ones from the list, when you hit batch render, it will automatically turn this image and split it out into the different pieces that you want. So there's not really much work that we have to do. And I'll show you what this looks like. Because my example renders already have these kind of built into it. So for the key light, for example, there is something called beauty that we're going to create. And beauty is just like all the information together. But we've also got these other guys called like direct diffuse. This is another chunk of channels in the image. Here's direct diffuse. See how it's only showing you like color and texture? But you don't see like any reflections. The glass isn't see-through. Doesn't even look like glass. The only thing on the glass that shows up is the label, because that was the only diffused part of the bottle. Here's direct specular. There's our...
The upside down.
Yep, basically. Okay. And we also got indirect diffuse. This one's kind of weird. So look between direct diffuse and indirect. Here's direct. What do you think that one is?
The light from behind?
It is, yeah, it's the light behind it, but
It's the light that it's making or reflecting, maybe?
yeah, we're getting closer. So diffuse, like if you look at this guy, doesn't this just kind of feel like your diffuse properties and how it interacts with like the light hitting it, right? You can see shadows and things like shadow from the pulley, shadow from the scraper. The indirect diffuse, it's still diffuse properties, because if I make this brighter, you can see like the textures are there, so it's still the diffuse part of the material, But instead of this being where the light hits it directly, hence direct diffuse, indirect diffuse is, you know how light bounces around in the scene? This is the bounced light. So you're seeing the diffuse has now been broken apart, so there's a separate bounced part of the diffuse, which looks kind of grainy, but you don't really notice it that much because it's so subtle. And again, we had a direct spec, which is the highlight. Here's indirect spec. What's different about this compared to the other one? They're both reflections. There's something different, though. What is this a reflection of? What are those things reflecting? The light, like you can see it, right? Like that's the shape of the light, like on the glass. Like this is it reflecting the light. So what is that?
That's the indirect.
What? Yeah, sort of. Like you'll notice how the wall looks really dark, but all the books and things are picking up a lot of color. The indirect specularity is not the objects reflecting the light, it's the objects reflecting each other. Like all that gray is it reflecting the gray wall behind it. And you can see that because look what's happening right here. See that patch of red? What is that? That's the red paint. Like it's just reflecting on top of the shelf. What's that? What do you mean? Like of this?
There's some sort of like.
This would be. I mean, there's not really any way for me to make this wall look right. Basically, this almost looks like it's a bunch of mirrors. If you had some weird mirror material maybe on everything, you would kind of do this. This would be really tricky though, because if you make everything a mirror, these aren't going to be able to reflect anything because it's just like you're in the hall of mirrors. Like you can't. It's not really anything for it to reflect. Yeah, you can't do this in real life. And here's the last one, which is transmissive. What's that? That's our glass, right? This is the see-through effect. So we've got direct diffuse, or indirect diffuse, direct specular, indirect specular, and then we also have transmissive, which is our glass. Like those kind of make up all the parts we were talking about. But again, if we were doing other things, we could have had a scatter on there and iridescence and, you know, whatever other material property we think we wanted. All right. So how do we do this? And it's like this on every light too, by the way. So if I look at like the fill, it's the same thing. Direct diffuse, indirect, direct specular. It's like that on every light. So here's how we set it up. Let's go back to Maya. To do this, and I'm going to save my scene since it's been pretty stable so far. I'm going to go in the render settings. And this is kind of why I'm doing the recording, because this part right here is different. It's going to be a little easier for you guys. We are going to go to the passes part of the render settings. Now, if I go to passes, and I don't know if you guys have ever clicked over here yet, but if you go to the render passes part, this looks very complicated. Like a bunch of weird letters and abbreviations that we have no clue what they mean. I mean, I know what most of them kind of do. A lot of checkboxes. Basically what this whole area is about is anytime you do a batch render, this is the part that tells RenderMan like how many images you want, how many channels you want to get, what is the bit depth, like is it an 8-bit, 32-bit render, what type of passes, like you want a diffuse pass, a specular pass, you know, a transmissive pass. We're going to pick all that stuff. Now, I'll kind of show you, like, because this took me a little bit to figure out, because it's a little clunky, but what I did initially when I got in here, because I kind of knew how this worked from doing it with Mental Ray, so I knew it had to be kind of similar. So what I did initially is I got in here, and I'm like, all right, well, I can tell right now if I were to render, I would just get one image that has RGBA channels. There's one output, which sounds fine. So what I thought was, all right, well, on the left, I can see all these weird presets. And I know you guys probably have no clue what half these even mean, or maybe any of them at all. But if I keep going, some of these will start to make sense. And you'll recognize, yeah, there we go.
Not anymore.
For anyone viewing the recording, by the way, what's happening is every time, because this is not doing it on my laptop, every time you guys hear us yell about darkness, it is our TV screen is turning black. Just so you're aware. Yeah, because I'm recording that and my laptop's not doing it. It's the TV. All right. So if I kind of keep going down, though, you're like, oh, wait, there's a term I've heard. Beauty, emissive, direct diffuse, indirect to specular, transmissive. So there's a lot of other ones there that we do know kind of what they do. Like there's our subsurface, like that scattering. There's another subsurface right there, which is slightly different. So now let's say I pick one. Like I know we want to do direct diffuse. This is what I did is I clicked on it and I hit this little arrow over here. I'm going to move it over. Now it looks like it's doing what you want. Like, great, I have a diffuse pass. I'll do it again with specular. Or maybe I can do multiple. Let's add both. So I can keep like going through the list and adding something. We've lost the image again. I can keep adding it, but when I do it that way, once this kind of pops back up, is see how this is listed as 4 different lines? So the first time I rendered this, what happened was when I did the batch, it did the renders, but it gave me a different image for every single render pass. That means if you decided you had some pretty advanced project where you want 20 different render passes out of it to control all sorts of crazy parts of the scene, that means for one layer, just a key light, you've now taken that key light render and broken that up into like 20 different images for one layer for one frame. Because you guys might be doing sequences like for animated characters, and now you're thinking, all right, so that was 20 images, and now I have the fill light and the dome light. Now we're up to 60 different images, and now I have 1,000 frames for the timeline. We've now gone to 60,000 images. We're now managing in our folder.
Just go ahead and burn the laptop.
And that's when you just
Set it on fire.
throw it all away. So that's kind of the first thing is while we are going to, you can still make the passes this way. I don't want you guys getting separate outputs for each image because that's going to add a lot of clutter to everything. So let me get rid of these. I'm going to click on them, hit the little minus just to remove it. Okay. What you're going to do instead is don't pull from the list on the left. Hit the plus symbol on the right. Okay, it's going to load up a little window where it says Create RenderMan Output. Now you don't need to name it. Don't worry about doing any of that stuff. But where it says Output Channels, it says right-click for a menu of known channels. When you right-click in here, this is the list we were seeing on the left. It's actually even showing us more than what was being previewed on the left side. These are all the options you can pick from. And some of it's kind of weird. I think they're still kind of cleaning it up. You'll notice there's some duplicates. Like, see how the letter Z is listed twice? I know you guys don't know what Z means, but that's a depth pass, like how far away things are from the camera. So what you're going to do is you open the documentation, look at the passes you need. So what we want is we'll start with the ones we saw in the EXR. We want beauty. When I click, you'll notice I lose the option to go pick another one. So you have to click on beauty, right click. I'm looking now for direct diffuse, which not direct diffuse lobe, direct diffuse. Direct diffuse, indirect diffuse. And they're not alphabetical, so have fun. Beauty, direct diffuse, indirect diffuse, direct specular. Right click, indirect specular. I'm going to right click again. And the last one, transmissive. So it's a little weird because you kind of have to find it in the list. It's not organized very well right now. They'll probably clean that up in a pretty new version. It's a work in progress here. Now, let me write down what we've already got. I'm kind of making an official list. So we've got beauty, direct diffuse, indirect diffuse, direct specular, indirect specular, transmissive. Those are the ones we've picked at this moment. And again, it's all in the documentation. So as long as you guys are reading through that, you'll know which ones to click on. There's nothing really wrong with doing other ones. I mean, you can add other ones if you want. We're not going to use them, but you could do that. So we've added those guys to the list. Now, remember, though, we're also talking about controlling some of this other stuff. Like I want alphas for the objects, right? To say, let me affect only the pulley or only the scraper. So these guys can also be included as a pass. So on top of this, we're going to create some alpha passes for the objects, and I'm going to do actually two different utility passes. Actually, I think we're just going to do depth, I think. Let me double check that.
Can I help you, sir? You need the survey?
All right, I'm just hopping in the documentation real quick just to kind of make sure that we're doing everything right. Okay, so here's the list. I'm kind of looking at the Google Doc, what you guys are going to be doing. So we've got all these guys added.
Oh, it's a lot of misspelled stuff.
You bet. Yeah, it's like, has no clue what that is. That's fine. So we got all these guys here, transmissive, it knows what that word is. And then we have these mat IDs and something called Z. Okay, so let's add those real quick. Okay, I'm going to go back here. Now, where's that window? There it is. It's still open. I haven't hit create. Now, if you guys, let's say you do all these and you hit create and then you realize afterwards, like, oh, I should have had other things in it. Unfortunately, there's not a way to include other passes once you hit apply. When you make it, it's final. You have to, if you want to add stuff or modify it, unfortunately, at the moment, you have to delete it and just start over and make the list again. Yeah, they'll fix that soon. But exactly. So I'm going to right click. I'm going to add the mat passes. So I'm only having you guys do 4 different alphas. For the scraper, the pulley, the metal pieces, and then the vial. Not the books and all that stuff, but our kind of our main objects. So I'm going to do mat 0 through 3. And if you don't like the number 0, you could do 1 through 4. Doesn't really matter. But I'll do 0, mat ID 1, 2, 3. I've added those probably at the front of the list, so you can't see it. And then the last one we need, after we've done those, is something called Z. And Z is our depth. And I'll show you what these look like in Nuke in just a second. They both do the same thing. It doesn't matter. Just pick Z. I don't know why it's listed twice, but just pick Z, hit create. Now we have one output that has all this information together. Okay. Now let me show you what some of these other passes look like, because you all saw the material passes. Here are the other guys. So I went through these ones. Here's what the mat IDs look like.
Oh, nice.
It's literally just an alpha. Because if you guys didn't have this means now in Nuke or Photoshop, like you're tracing around something, right? That doesn't sound fun. And remember too, if this was a moving camera, if you didn't have this, you're now tracing something every frame to follow it. Like, I hope this matches the vial. This is automatically just works. It's very, very accurate. There's the bottle behind it. Now depth, depth is Z. When you render it, it's not going to show up as Z when you look at it in Nuke. It's going to list itself as depth. Anytime you see the letter Z, it just means it's a depth pass, like distance from camera. Just like when you see U or V, those means like 2-dimensional UV coordinates, or X, Y, Z. Z is a distance thing. So depth. Now when I pick it, this is what depth looks like. And this is going to look very alarming. And most of you, when you go to view your depth pass, are going to see red, and you're going to think that something is terribly wrong. Yeah. Depth. Like D, yeah, it looks like death right now. It is not. Depth, like D-E-P-T-H, like distance. Depth, when you see it like this, looks wrong. However, I'll show you that we did do this right. So in Nuke, see how when I move my mouse around at the bottom of the viewer, see those like RGB numbers where it says like red and then green, blue, alpha? Yeah. Look what's happening to the red channel when I move my mouse around. Yeah, there's nothing but red, but the number is changing. There is something there. The reason why it looks flat is because, remember, think about what colors and numbers mean. If you wanted solid red, that's just red with the number 1. right? Like 0 to 1 for any channel. The whole thing looks red because all the pixels have a number above 1. So Nuke just shows you solid red. But if you really want to see the depth, what you could do is in Nuke, there's an exposure slider at the top. If you just darken the hell out of the viewer, it will eventually show up and you can see it. There, yeah, it's starting to appear. Yeah, it's
really cool.
Daredevil.
yeah, it's like this weird blood fog or something. The depth is there. It's just very, very bright, but it's not broken. It just looks weird when you're viewing it. But don't be alarmed by that. This is still totally correct. So depth passes, we can use those to do. We could do depth of field, like putting things out of focus with the camera, which is what we're going to be doing on Friday. What else could you use a depth pass for? This is in the discussion you guys are doing this week. Yeah, fog. Like that looks like fog now. Like that could be used for fog effect. Well, isn't that kind of similar to atmospheric perspective? The other thing when you look over the horizon, like the long, open field, there's like mountains in the background that have that kind of bluish tint of the sky. Yeah, exactly. When you look at the mountains in the background, they have that kind of lighter blue color because what you're seeing is you're looking through the sort of fog of the atmosphere. And if you look through it through a long enough distance, they kind of collectively show you this very small tint of a blue color. So sometimes what I'll do for like more complicated projects like matte paintings or like really big environments is I'll use these depth passes to like auto color correct stuff in the background so they start picking up the sky color, like the farther away it is from the camera. But that's another thing you can use these depth passes for. But we're just going to be doing depth of field. Okay. So here comes the not so fun part. Well, no, that's fun. That's going to seem fun compared to what we're about to do.
Oh, no.
The rendering part is not that bad. It's just waiting. You guys can kind of hang out and do some other work while that's kind of going on. The problem with this is, all right, you know how we listed these matte ID passes, right? Now, I know what objects I'm trying to get. Do we tell RenderMan what matte ID 0 means? Like which object is matte ID 0? We didn't. We just made an empty channel for it to eventually store data. We have to point RenderMan into the right object so it knows which alphas we want and which number they're going to be listed under. This is the part that is not too fun, and they're well aware of it because we had one of their guys on campus and we kind of talked to him about this, and he knows it's clunky. And I thought I was doing this wrong when I first started setting it up. I'm like, this cannot be right. And then I looked up a video, and it is exactly what I was doing. So it's, yep, going to darkness again. All right. Once this pops back up, I'm not going to miss this TV. I like the lecture room, but man, the TV is the worst.
I'll take it.
That's fine. Okay, so here's what we got to do to get this to work. We want to get into the hypershade to do this. Now, I know, like, I was kind of noticing when I was going through your scenes, a lot of you guys are doing really well with, like, organizing stuff. Like, I think everyone was doing, like, the multiple tabs, naming your materials. Thank you. That makes it so much easier to grade this stuff. Now, since I'm going to be kind of working with different materials to help me connect things together, I don't want to mess up anything I've already done. So what I'm going to do is make a new tab. And I'm going to call this matte ID. And just, what's that? Yeah, it's basically just going to be called matte ID, just so I can start bringing in materials in here. So I don't mess up anything we've done. It's just a different network that's kind of independent from the other work we've already finished. Now I want to bring in the materials that relate to the objects I'm going to do the passes for, the matte IDs. Now for you guys in the lab, it's again scraper, pulley, metal, vial. I don't have those here. I have different objects. So the ones I'm going to do is the pulley, that other wooden pulley behind it, a box, and the bottle. But find your materials you want, which you've hopefully named. If you haven't, good luck. I mean, let's pretend I didn't name anything. How could I figure out what material's on the object if you have no clue what you've even assigned? You got like 40 materials in there.
Attribute.
Yeah, you could, like if you click on this guy, I don't know if you guys know that there's a button right there, graph material on selected network. That will show you the material that you're currently, like whatever object you're clicking on. It's that button right there. That would probably be a good idea. If you haven't done it, like edit, delete unused nodes, right? Just to like delete all the stuff that you haven't been using. Like if you have duplicates. Yeah.
Would that delete the Lambert one?
No. The Lambert one will never, you actually can't delete it even if you wanted to. Yeah, so that won't be going anywhere. If you guys end up deleting Lambert 1, I'd like to see how you did that, because you can't delete it. Like Maya will throw up errors. It will not let you, like challenge accepted. Like I can find a way.
Chuck Norris did it once.
I'm sure he did.
That was many years ago.
All right.
That's a possibility.
True.
So I know what materials I want. What you're going to do is when you find your materials for the objects, just at the top, middle mouse drag them down into the node graph. Don't graph the whole network. I don't want to see 4 materials with like 50 nodes connected together. That's too much. So I'm going to start with the pulley. There's my node at the top, middle mouse drag down. Just the material, not all the stuff going into it. That's too much. Okay, let's do the wooden material. In your case, it's probably the scraper. So I'm just going to put these guys below each other like that. I'm going to start stacking them vertically. We've also got the box. That's a layered material, so it looks a little different. But I'm not including the layer mixer and all the layers. It's just the main material. Let me do the glass. Middle mouse drag that down. There's the glass. So it's really just the main material itself, not the other stuff. Just bring them all down. So these are the guys I need in order to get this to work. Now, the next thing we have to do is on the material, yeah.
Do we need to have like all the layers, so like the book layers and the shelf layer and the wall layer too?
No, you don't have to do that. You could do. I mean, if you guys on your own want to do other mat IDs for the other objects, you can. If you want to do it that way, make sure in the passes that you add like more than up to mat ID 3. You might do like 4, 5, 6, 7, and then you'd have more options for other materials. But that's up to you guys. As long as I see the 4 that are in the documents, that's all I care about. If you want to go beyond that, you can. But I've got those materials in here. Now I'm going to start with the pulley. What we have to do is on the pulley material, we have to add a new attribute to it. Remember how we were doing that with the file node? Like where I had to go up to like add attributes, RenderMan texture controls, and add all those like linear stuff at the bottom of the file. It's kind of similar to that, but we're doing it on the material. And there was someone that was in here earlier, and I can't remember who it was. Who was the guy that was in here? Like one of you guys were actually in this area looking for it. Like the other RenderMan options.
Probably me. Sounds like I would do.
Yeah, we're gonna go with that. But basically, like it's like what we did with the file node. On the material though, you're doing the same thing. It doesn't say add texture controls. It just says manage attributes. So when I hit it, and this is on top of the pulley material right now. If I hit it, this is showing you every single hidden attribute in RenderMan that you could add. And we're not going to get into like that, what dice means, you know, like trace depth and smooth shading. Like we don't know what half this stuff is. Motion blur, that's like if you're doing animation, you want motion blur, like trailing on an object. The ones we want are these guys right here, the mat IDs. They're listed. Now, because I'm starting with the pulley, I'm going to add mat ID 0 to this one, and then I'm going to do like 1, 2, 3 on the others. So you pick mat ID 0, and you may want to even write this down so you can keep track of which object is which mat ID number, because this looks a little confusing. You add mat ID 0. Hit add. You'll see it moves that over to this right side. Now what happens when you do that is if you look at the pulley material over here, it looks the same, but look what's at the bottom. That's a new thing, RenderMan, mat ID 0. This is telling the material that it's going to make a channel called mat ID 0, and the color slider is you picking what color you want the alpha to look like. Now, what's going to happen if I leave it black? It's going to look like this, where instead of you getting that, you're getting a black alpha on a black background, which is
That's a good idea.
That's what we needed.
that is exactly what you want. Do not do that. We want to make that white. Okay, let's do this again on the next material. I'm going to go down to here. Now, we could do different colors. I'm going to do this white for everything, but if you want, you could do magenta, I guess, or red. And keep in mind, though, we're going to be using these to control something. If you start picking really weird colors like aquamarine, like you can pick aquamarine, but eventually if you want to use that for something like an alpha, it's going to be a lot more complicated because you're now trying to key the color to turn it to an alpha. Yeah.
Let's say whenever we were splitting up to make it look, when we were doing diffuse materials and bump mapping, we split the handle and the blade.
Yes.
Could we assign
the same number to both?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
You can do that. Yep. So what he's talking about is with a scraper, a lot of you guys have two different materials, like one on the blade, one on the handle, and you want both to probably be in the same alpha. So you'd have both materials in here, and then you would add the same mat ID number to both. So they would both have like mat ID 0, for example. But on this one, here's the wood. Okay, let's do it again. Attributes, manage attributes. We're going to do this as mat ID 1, add. For you guys, yeah, sure. I'm not really checking like that the numbers are the exact same. As long as I can see every object, you're good. But there's my wood. Go down here to RenderMan, make that white for 1. Here's the box. Same thing again. Manage attributes. Mat ID 2, add. There it is. White alpha, and my last one. This is mat ID 3. 3, add, and make it white. So it's really just repeating that over and over again, but picking a different mat ID number. Now, just kind of be careful though, because this thing, it's kind of weird how it updates. There's like a slight delay. So if I click back on the pulley, you'll notice that it sometimes when you click between them, you'll see the number doesn't quite up. Yeah, it takes a second to like update to the right color and number. Just give it a few seconds. It takes a second to kind of refresh it. But you should see it looks like that. 0, 1, 2, 3. So that sounds like we're done, right? No, it is not. No. Like, the other part is, okay, let me kind of walk you through what we're doing here. Let's bring this back up. We've made the channels in the file. I made the attributes on the material. You would think that would be enough for RenderMan to connect the dots and understand those are connected. It is not. Now you have to manually connect them together with this other special node called the mat ID node. So if you're ever kind of looking for this guy, 'cause I know some of you probably still like looking through the list to find things, it's under the patterns, and if you kind of keep going down far enough, it's this thing right here. Pixar mat ID. Obviously you don't have to like find it in the list. Just hit tab, type it in, and you'll create it. I'll do it that way. So tab, Pixar mat ID. Here it is. Here's what the mat ID node looks like.
Oh my god.
More sliders. Now to make this even more difficult, this wasn't bad enough. Now I have this thing hanging out. Like I don't know what to do with any of this because it feels like you almost want to connect something into these guys, like all the 0, 1, 2, 3. Nope, that's not what you're doing. This goes into the material. It actually connects from here to that guy to the attribute. Now here's where the problem comes in. Is even if I were to take some output from here and connect it on this side, the first issue is where's my outputs? I don't see any dots at all. Okay, well that's not good. Now I could click here and like you can see there's options popping up. Okay, but where's my output? And on this side, I'm trying to connect into that guy right there, that thing we added, the Mat ID channel, and I don't see it. Now, it is here. Do you remember how we like saw all those? Yes. Brace yourself. I'm going to click on this node, and we're going to hit 3. Let's see. Where's the Mat ID node? Where do you think it is? I wish it was. Is it? Wait a minute. Oh, wait, it is. Well, no, we got presents out of nowhere. Wait, is that right? Oh, that is right. Never mind. I actually never really realized that. This, though, if you keep going down, it's kind of funny. This happens to still work in alphabetical order, even though it's called Mat ID 0. For some reason, they have it listed as utility pattern. Yeah, I don't know. Okay. Oh, yeah.
Are you sure about that?
So utility pattern, it's way down here. Now, what you could do, obviously you don't need to hit 3 and scroll down until you find it. What I was kind of recommending you guys do is if you hit 3, you could use this little search box, type in utility, and that kind of filters out all the other stuff, so you don't even see it. So I'll connect this a few different ways, and I'll let you guys figure out how you want to do it. So this is one way. Type in utility, there's our input, and it's actually this guy right here. When you hit the little plus, it's utility pattern 0. Again, why would we ever know that? I don't know. It's just the way it is. Now on this thing, I need to get the output. So if you want to just connect the little dots together, I need to force this to show me the right output. Remember how we did 3 before to kind of expose everything? If I hit 3 on this guy, that's the one we wanted right there. So it's not 4, it's 3. And then you take this, connect it to that. That's it. And you can see it makes a second one. Don't worry about that. As long as it goes into utility pattern 0, it's good. I know this seems very sketchy. Like, I'm not feeling good about any of this. But it will work. Okay, I'll do it again. Okay, here's me doing the exact same thing again. Here's the wood. I'm going to hit 3, go to here, utility, drag it over, and it will look gray. But if you hold it, it'll open up and connect to utility pattern 0. Like the utility pattern numbers, by the way, don't match your ID number. So this is not utility pattern 1. It's still 0 on every material. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Yep. You can. This is kind of why this is a little tricky, because it's just such a clunky way to go about making this thing. Yeah, with Mental Ray, they actually did this part a lot better in Mental Ray. Mental Ray was literally just open up a list in Maya called a relationship editor, clicking on the objects you want and hitting apply, and it's done. But this is, yeah, we're not going back to Mental Ray. Mental Ray's dead. Okay, now here is the other way to do it. Instead of us like connecting the dots together, I'm going to go back to 4. Let's pretend we don't see any of this. Oh, because I have utility in there. Whoops.
Yeah, I was like
4. I'm like, where'd my stuff go? 3. Let's get rid of that. 4. Okay. So this is one method to do it. Here's the other one. Have you guys ever noticed how there's this little like button that's always hanging out on the top? Some of you have probably clicked on it. Do you know what this thing is? Like what that's doing? Or like that? Yeah. Input and output. When you click on the circle, what you're doing, it's almost like on this one, you're able to pick from whatever the inputs are in the list. So you don't have to always hit 3 to expose everything. If I know the thing I need, I don't have to look at it by hitting 3. It's called result AOV, right? So if I click on this, I can pick, where is it? Is it seriously not showing up? Oh, is it actually only showing up now? Oh, it's not listing for some reason. Yeah, I guess we'll do it that way. No. We'll do it that way, though. We're taking the long way around. So we're going to go click on that, other, result AOV. Now it's grabbing the result AOV. And then over here, oh no. Let's do that. Okay, let's click it over. Now this guy is the input. If I click on this, utility pattern 0, connect.
I feel like that's a longer way of doing it.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter. It's actually faster once you get used to it. So click, other, result AOV, click utility pattern 0. Again, like when you guys do it, I don't care which method you pick. Like it's all the same thing. It's just two different ways to kind of make the connection work. Did you have a question?
Since I can't really see result AOV in the first one, can I just drag and then click on it there?
What do you mean? Sorry, say it again. Like if you can't see result AOV.
Well, if you press what 3? No, 4.
Yep.
3, and then there you see it.
Yeah.
Right. So it'll be quicker to get result AOV from there and just drag it and click on the glass.
Oh right, like if you hit 3 instead of us doing that, you could do result AOV.
And then click.
Like click this and then go to that thing. Yes, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, you can combine the two different techniques together. Yeah, that's all the same thing. Okay. Wasn't that fun? Now we're finally done. That was, no, there's not another step. That was it. Yeah, that was it. So again, when you guys are doing the mat ID passes, so remember that you want to add them to they're in the render settings. We're just making them in the list of our passes. There was also, actually, let me do it this way. Render settings, add attribute on material, which we did. And then it was create Pixar mat ID, and then connect, I think it was result AOV?
Yeah.
Right, yeah, result AOV to utility pattern 0. 4 steps to do that. Yeah, as long as you kind of have that written down somewhere, or you mean just obviously watch the video, you'll kind of figure it out.
I'll punch him. I'll kill you. Not even.
So
worried
probably
about
like out of all the things that like we kind of went through with RenderMan, just from like start to finish, this is the worst part of the whole thing. Like the entire class, this is the hardest part. They are again well aware of it. I'm sure in about a year it's going to be completely different and they're going to simplify it. But right now, this is what it is. All
You're
right.
gonna be teaching your kid like this is how you do it. No, there's a faster way.
Yeah. Oh, it'll be much better pretty soon. All right. So we got through that. We have the mat ID set up. I think we're pretty much good. And I kind of tell you what numbers or which object. And obviously, you can do the scraper twice because you have 2 different pieces. Yeah, this kind of walks you through it. Okay. We're ready to do the final batch render to make sure this works. So once you get through all that, we are basically good to go. So we already made sure the light render layers work. We've got all the passes set up. We did all these weird matte connections. It's now just waiting on us to kick off the render. So to do this, inside of the render settings, let me get this guy open too. There's a few things we're going to want to change. And make sure you do this because your renders are going to look very weird if you do not do this. Okay, now over here, there's 2 outputs. So if we hit batch render, what's going to happen is, like, even if we rendered, well, actually, let's start over here first. For the layers, see this button on the right? This tells RenderMan which layers you want to render. And see how they're all currently turned on? If you hit batch render, it's going to render your scene, everything together, and then render every light one by one. Okay, that's going to take a long time. We don't want to wait on that. Do we even need the scene at all? No, we're just using that just to kind of see what the whole project looked like. These are the ones we're doing. So I'm going to turn this off. Do not render this layer. That's what that button means. And I wouldn't even do all 3 of these guys on yet. I think most of you are going to want to do it one at a time just to make sure they look okay. Like just the key light. Look at the key light when it's done. If it's good, then yeah, move on to the next one. So I'm going to keep these off and only focus on this one. Like the layer you're on with the visibility doesn't matter. This is the button that tells the renderer which one to pick. Yeah. What? Wait, say it again? I don't think I did.
I'm like getting really like deja vu.
He's probably you're probably thinking about the visibility.
Oh, maybe this. Yeah. So this is changing what layer you're looking at in Maya. Like, let me move this out of the way. So all that visibility thing does. Let me back up. This is telling, like, if you're in Maya rendering, this determines what you're going to see, like, in the image tool when you render. This right side is just specifically for a batch render, which is separate. So maybe you're getting those mixed up, but just make sure that button on the right is set to the right layer, whatever one you are trying to render. So we'll stick with this guy. So that's fine. We got one layer. Now over here, if I have both of these still in the outputs, we're going to get two images. I'm going to get one that just looks like the beauty, which is you just like rendering in the image tool. You're going to get some color image. And then aside from that, I'm going to get a separate chunk of passes with all this stuff in it. Now, we don't even need this guy. I really just want all these render passes. So what you're going to want to do is we want to turn compute off. Now, when you do it this way, because you still might want the original color channels to render, like if you ever wanted to kick off your original scene layer, like you just want that one image of everything, you still may want this to work. So one thing you can kind of do with render layers that's also really powerful is you can do something called render overrides. And these are like very, very strong once you kind of understand how they work. What an override does is it lets me change attributes uniquely for each layer. So for example, for this, I don't want to see the RGBA channels render on any of these guys, but I might want to see them on the master layer if I did that later. So what you can do is if you're on the key light layer, go to your RGBA output, right click where it says compute, and you're going to pick create absolute override for visible layer. And by the way, this does not appear if you're on the scene layer. If I go back here, let me right click. See how it's like just, you want to lock the attribute? If I'm on a new render layer and you right click, there's other things you can pick from. So I'm on RGBA, right click on compute, create absolute override. It's going to turn orange. You can see a bunch of weird things that's happened in here in the layer. And once it's orange, uncheck it. Now, what did that do? Watch what happens when I go back to my scene layer. Do you see what just happened with that button? It's turning on and off depending on the layer you're on. This means, and you can do this on a bunch of things. This means if you want to do, you can make a different light layer, do an override on the light's color, and make the light a completely different color on one layer. And if you go back and forth, the light will keep changing color. Okay, so we have that off. I'm going to do this again. So fill light layer. We're going to go to the fill light layer. Right click on RGBA compute. Create absolute layer override. Uncheck. Go to the dome light. Make it visible. Same thing. Right click on compute. Create absolute override. Uncheck it. So you're just basically disabling that so we do not get a second image. There's nothing wrong with leaving it on. It just means you're going to be waiting longer for the render because it's rendering two images every single time. So if you don't do that, it's not a game ender. It's just you're waiting longer. All right. Now the other thing we want to do, which we don't have to do an override on, but on the mat ID, this is a little more kind of complicated to explain, but keep this button turned off. Keep that off. This it's kind of a weird thing to talk about, but basically what happens is if this is turned on, you know how like with an image, like there's always those default RGBA channels in every image file, right? And the image that we're doing has more than RGBA. Like these guys we've been looking at in Nuke the whole time, and you can just think about it, we've been looking at an image that has all these other channels. This is not just a 4-channel image like RGBA. The image format we're doing, EXR, like the same file format you've been saving as the whole month, EXR files can hold up to 1,024 channels. You will never use 1,000 channels. Good luck.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah. I mean, if you had like thousands of objects and you make a mat ID for thousands of objects, I mean, one, think about how long that would take you to connect those in the hypershade. But if you had 1,000 objects with individual mat IDs, yes, you're using the EXR to its fullest potential. You're not going to do that. This can hold 1,000 channels. This means that when you render it, even though this looks like this should be like, you know, a dozen different images, it will convert all those into one image file. So it's a lot easier to manage. But this checkbox right here, the reason we're turning it off is because when I was testing it out, and I think it's a bug, if that is turned on, what happens is it takes all the passes and it tries to move them into the color channels. Like it starts to push them forward into the regular RGBA channels. And it kind of starts screwing up the naming. When you view it in Nuke, you'll notice the colors look offset, like they're not even displaying the right way. I don't want to get too much more into it than that, but just leave this off to you know, avoid any issues later on Friday. Just keep that turned off. OpenEXR is RGBA. That should be in the docs. I hope it is. Yes, that. Keep that off. That's very, very important. Okay. Now, it's already going to do an OpenEXR format. Do me a favor, if you guys have Maya open, everyone, or whoever has it open, click on the Common tab for me. And I want you to look at your render settings, whoever's got Maya open. Okay, on the image format section right here, is anybody in this group not seeing OpenEXR as an option? Well, it is for me, and probably most of you see that. Under Common, under the image format. Is anybody not seeing that? Some of you might only see like Maya IFF. You don't see any OpenEXR?
You just say file output and file name prefix, and then underneath that says image format.
Yeah,
Yep.
no, that's what I'm looking.
Yep. So you don't see OpenEXR at all, do you?
No.
Good. We have one in the class. We've had some months where like a third of the class doesn't see it. And I was kind of panicking because I'm like, that's not good. We're trying to do EXR files. The good thing is this doesn't matter. Even if you have some weird bug where it doesn't think that you have an EXR format, this is irrelevant because as long as this is set to OpenEXR here under the passes, it will still work. So don't worry about that. Now, the other thing you want to do is before you kick off the render, make sure in the comment section that you have everything set. Like the right camera, the right quality. So right here under the file name prefix, like when you do a batch, look at where this image is going to go.
Oh my god.
Desktop, this is the path of your computer. Now my project is on the desktop. So it's going to go in my desktop on that project. It's going to make a RenderMan folder in there, which exists. And inside of that, what's happening? Another folder called 2 materials. That's my scene name. It's making a folder based on my scene name. Within the folder, there's an images folder. And then inside of that, there's another file called 2 materials. That's a lot of like folders in folders, right? Where this image is going to go. But keep an eye on this, because if you're kind of wondering where your file is going to go, if you hit batch render, you have no clue where it went, this is telling you. Look at the top of your Common tab. Now, what we want to do is change this. Because see how right now it's naming it according to my scene name? Because you can see how it's not set, using scene name. Select all that, right click, you're going to pick render layer. Watch what this does. See what it did? Now why is it calling it dome white layer? I'm on the dome white layer. Like if you like just happen to be on a different layer, it'll rename the image for you. So it's basically going to auto-name your renders according to your layers. So if you guys named your render layers, this will automatically name it for you. That way you know which one you're looking at. Render layer. And everything else should be already set. These guys will be fine. This is actually set wrong for the lecture. It's supposed to be a HD 720, but your thing in the lab's already set. Just make sure that the resolution looks correct. HD 720, the render cam. Is anyone seeing 2 cameras in that list where it says perspective? Just kind of be careful about that. Sometimes you'll see there's 2 cameras listed here. If you see a second camera, there's a little trash can next to it. Hit the trash can to get rid of it. It should only be render cam. Yeah.
Do you know if we can change the location of our batch render save?
Yeah, you probably can. I have to probably do some digging. There is probably a way to rework it in like the workspace or some like other features, but I have to probably do a little experimenting with that. All right. So once this is all set, make sure that your render settings are also working. I know you guys have some stuff set up here. Now, before we get out of here, I want to do one render and just make sure you guys understand what this is going to look like when you hit batch render. So that way when you get to the lab, you can just start working on it. I do not want to render with this setting right now, because this could mean we're waiting for like 30 minutes just to find out it was broke. So what I'm going to do is take my max just for a test render and make it 8. This is going to look really grainy, but that's fine. 8 samples. We're going to try this out. All right, I have only the key light layer set to renderable, and everything else from what I can see looks correct. Yep, that looks good. Pass is enabled. All right, so what you're going to do from here is you go to your RenderMan menu at the top, and you hit batch render. Now, what I want some of you guys to do is when you hit batch render, there's going to be about a good chunk of you at the bottom of your screen. It is going to throw an error up. Something like could not start command. You'll know if it doesn't work pretty quickly because it just won't seem like it's doing anything. If you notice that your batch render doesn't start, the fix for this, and it's really easy, is you go into your preferences. Because we had this happen the first month we taught RenderMan, and I didn't know this was going to be a problem until I started talking about this in the lab. And over half the class had failing renders when I'm doing the lecture, and I had no idea why, and it was a terrible time. What we figured out the problem is if you go to your preferences, go under RenderMan in your Maya preferences, scroll down through your RenderMan options. You're going to get to an area called batch queuing, which is like a batch render. Hit that button right there to reset your environment key. It's like your license. What happened was, I think if you have an older version of RenderMan or if you ever update something, the key doesn't update and it thinks the license is incorrect and it never starts to render. But as long as you hit that button, if you see an error, that will fix it immediately. Then you can hit batch render, it will work. So for anyone listening to the video, go in here, hit reset under RenderMan preferences, and you only have to do it if your batch render doesn't work. All right, let's try it out. RenderMan. Batch render. Watch what happens when I get this thing to launch. It should pop up a separate window here eventually. Oh, hit continue. Where is it? There it is. A new window has popped up, which you guys have not seen before. This is the local queue. Yes. If you guys ever do like...
It took me like a day and a half.
Yeah.
It was terrible.
If you guys ever do like full sequences, this is what you're going to be looking at when you do that. So the local queue, it looks kind of weird, but basically what it's doing is just showing you kind of what's happening as it's batch rendering it. So this is the project we submit, and you can see when I submit the render, there's 4 different steps it goes through. This is just submitting the image to let it start. That takes about 1 second. This one with the percentage, that's the render. That's the part you're going to be waiting on. And yeah, like it's going to take a bit. Mine's quick because I dropped it down real low. But when you do it, I mean, you're going to be seeing it crawl like 1%, and then a minute later, 2%. It will take a bit. That's fine. When it gets through this, though, it then saves the image, and it closes the job down to like terminate that whole task. You'll see these go by real quick once it gets through that second one. And saved image and close the task. It's done. Done. 4 completed. So that took 1 minute to do. Yours will probably be similar to that when you do your test render. Now let me try to find the image. Okay. Over here under common, remember where we said it's going to go? Project directory, RenderMan. All right, let's figure this out. So I'm going to go back to my desktop, lecture project, okay, RenderMan folder. Now, every time you hit batch render, it is going to make a new folder for you. Every time you submit something, new directory. So it never overwrites something. Now, it's made a couple other ones from earlier in the month when I was doing some other renders. Now, the weird part about this is when you see where it says 2 materials, images, let's do that. 2 materials, images. Okay, we have things here, and they're empty. Those are my layers. Nothing is in it. It's a little misleading. It's that guy with the weird numbers. Look for the folder with the weird numbers. Yeah. Images. This one right here, these are, like, every time you use the image tool, you know how you, like, have all those images that build up in a list? It's been auto-saving those for you in this directory the whole time. So when you go in here for the first time, it's probably going to look huge. Like, you're going to see a bunch of old renders you've done earlier in the month. But if you go to this guy, images, look what's there. It's the image. Now, don't be alarmed when you look at this. And I know we're getting out a little late. I'll extend the break. But when you see this guy, look at the name.
Hey.
See what it did?
Oh, God.
It named it according to the passes. Look at what it's supposed to submit. Just immediately rename this guy. Do not let it be called that. This whole thing should have been called, like, yeah, just that. Key light layer. That's all I wanted. So just wipe out the other part. There's probably a way to fix it through scripting. I just haven't figured that out yet. But rename it to key light layer. Now, you know how when you guys hit space, you can usually preview an image? Okay. Let's try to do that. Come on. Okay. Yeah, Maya won't crash. Now, notice what's happening with the preview. Right? Now, and over here, what some of you guys are going to notice is it won't just do this. When you look at the dimensions, it's going to say it's a 0 by 0 pixel image.
Oh, good.
And that does not sound good. That's totally fine. The reason the preview and all this stuff is like pinwheeling and it's getting stuck, remember how I had that checkbox that said don't open the EXR and the RGBA channels? I wanted to make sure that was turned off. There's no RGBA channels. So preview doesn't see those guys. It has no clue what to show you. And so it just doesn't know what to do. And if I hit space, it's not showing me anything. Do not panic. There is information there because you can clearly see there's something in it. It's 44 megabytes. What you want to do to preview it, like this is me checking it out, like you guys are going to do today. Take your file, go into Nuke. This is the only thing you need Nuke for. Drag it into Nuke's node graph. You'll see it makes a node. Now, if you want to view it, just click on your node. You need to connect it to the viewer. The viewer is this thing. Drag it to the viewer. Or you could just like click on it, hit 1. That connects it as well. But put it in the viewer. It's black, which is what I expected because I'm looking at the RGBA channels. What you're doing is you don't worry about the lines. That's a weird graphic issue. Click up here. You should be seeing all this stuff. Mine worked. And then you just click through it, make sure they look right. It worked. Direct diffuse.
That's really cool.
So all these passes did exactly what I thought they're going to do. Transmissive. All you're doing is just making sure that everything looks right. Usually if you guys get one of the layers to look correct and you can tell all the passes are there, you can have me or Shane look at it. We'll let you know if it looks correct. If one layer is good, there's probably a good chance they're all fine, and you can just let the batch render go and do its thing. But once you verified that works, what I would do is go back into Maya. We know it's good to go. I would just reset this back to whatever you guys had it set to, like 128 or 256. And then you can just kick off the batch render again and wait. And if you want to render one layer at a time, keep one of these on. Or if you just don't care, you could turn them all on, hit batch render, and go to Disney. Wait, I don't know. Don't go to Disney.
Watch some Netflix.
Anyone listening to the video, you cannot go to Disney. We will mark you out. But you can leave them all on if you want to do a batch render with all the images at one time. Okay, so it's a lot of technical steps, but in the end, we're just producing those final renders. So that's it. We will see you guys in the lab.